Good morning. It's Monday, June 24th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 262 days old. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Something dawned on me this weekend. The campus chaos has all but evaporated from the headlines. That's obviously a good thing for the students who endured abuse that most of us can't imagine, but this won't be out of sight, out of mind. Not for me, because the outside agitators who organized those hate fests are making plans right now for a miserable fall semester. They may even have more misery in store this summer off campus. We'll keep watching and report back here on the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest this morning will be Hanin Ghaddar. She is an analyst of Lebanon who's from Lebanon. Today, she's at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and like all of us, she's watching that border between Israel and Lebanon with serious concern. More from her in just a few minutes. The Washington Post ran a story on Saturday that begs a response. So here it is. The story was about the resignation of Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Andrew Miller. Let's be clear. He was not the Secretary of State. He was not the Deputy Secretary. He was not the Undersecretary. He was not the Assistant Secretary. He was a Deputy Assistant Secretary, a DAS as they are known, a position that does not require Senate confirmation. In other words, you have almost certainly never heard of him. Miller resigned last week, citing exhaustion after 8 months of war. I hear you, Andrew. I'm tired too. We could all use a breather. But that's not how the editors at the Washington Post frame this story. They have an axe to grind. They don't like Biden's Israel policy, and apparently neither did Miller. So guess what? For the Washington Post, that means it's Miller time. This was certainly not the first piece I have seen over the last 8 months highlighting some obscure bureaucrat resigning from government. Each time I've read one of these stories, I have scratched my head and thought, maybe I should have sent out a press release when I left the U.S. government at the age of 34. Hey, editors, maybe next time just run an 800-word piece with the sentence, "We don't like Biden's Israel policy," over and over again. That would only be a little less trite. It would also be 100% more honest. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the London Telegraph reports that Hezbollah is storing weapons and missiles at Beirut's Rafik Hariri airport. Okay, that's not really news. People who follow Hezbollah know that this has been true for maybe the last decade. But the report got into the nitty-gritty, and that's what made it newsworthy to me. The weapons are said to include ballistic missiles, unguided artillery rockets, laser-guided anti-tank missiles, and a toxic explosive powder called RDX. Apparently, unusually large boxes started arriving in November. If that's true, Hezbollah and Iran have been preparing for war for 7 months. That's a lot of prep time. Too much, if you ask me. Headline 2, the Biden administration is permitting the Islamic Republic of Iran to have absentee voter stations across America this Friday. You've got to be kidding. This is not democracy promotion. I'm sure the State Department will try to spin it that way, but let's be clear. The regime's Guardian Council approved 6 out of 80 candidates for this so-called vote. 5 of those 6 candidates are extremists. The 6th has no shot at winning. 30 voting stations all across the United States. That's what we're giving the terrorist sponsoring and human rights abusing regime that 8 months ago started a war in the Middle East that is still escalating. If you are wondering what in the wide world of sports is going on in Washington, you're not alone. And headline 3. At least 15 people are reportedly dead after a suspected ISIS attack targeting a church and a synagogue in Russia. The attack took place in Dagestan, and if you recall, that was where a mob descended upon Israelis at an airport in November of last year, just 1 month after the 10/7 attacks. At the time, there were questions as to whether the Putin regime gave the rioters a tacit or even explicit green light. But I'm not thinking about Russia right now. No, I'm looking at the potential rise in jihadist attacks. The French are warning about attacks at the Olympics. The Taliban is meeting with Iran to talk about targeting Israel. Al-Qaeda is recruiting off of 10/7. We're going to keep an eye on this space, folks. More to come. Okay, it's now time for my interview with Hanin Ghaddar, originally from Lebanon. Hanin is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. She is the former managing editor of Now Lebanon, an English language website covering Lebanese affairs. Hanin and I caught up recently to discuss what's happening on the northern border. Check it out here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome, Hanin Ghaddar.
Hey, John, how are you? Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you with us. So, before we dive into the substance, I want our audience just to get to know you a little bit. I remember a number of years ago, you spoke at an event in Washington, and shortly thereafter, you found yourself in the eye of a political storm in Beirut. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, that was in 2014. I was still living in Beirut and I came to Washington to participate on a panel that was organized by the Washington Institute. It was, a conference. And of course, the Hezbollah media machine realized that I'm speaking at the Washington Institute and there are a number of Israelis, including Ehud Barak, who was present at the conference. I wasn't on the same panel with him, but it didn't really matter. And in Lebanon, it's against the law to communicate directly with an Israeli, which they couldn't really prove. So there was a lot of photoshopping of pictures of me and him on the same panel, just to make sure that the character assassination happened. That was 2014. I went back to Beirut because the balance between March 14, March 8 was still not completely gone. So there was still a political balance, and I still felt that I was protected to a certain extent since I didn't really break the law, and it worked. Of course, legally it worked, but since then, I've been under a lot of pressure in Lebanon until I left. The media campaigns didn't stop, the personal threats didn't stop, the threats to the family didn't stop until I left. And then, of course, when I left and actually officially joined the Washington Institute, I discovered afterwards that they took the whole case to the military court, and I was sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was overturned because of U.S. pressure. Back in 2018, that was sentence came out, and the U.S. Government put a lot of pressure on the Lebanese military court, which is part of the Lebanese army, which receives a lot of assistance from the US. So there was a leverage there to use and force the military court to overturn the sentence. However, they sent it to a civil court, which they can dig out anytime. And I also know that this is not just the military court, it's Hezbollah, and which are still assassinating the opposition, especially Shia opposition, with Uthman Slim being the last one. So I decided a long time ago that even though I'm not convicted in Lebanon anymore, I am definitely on Hezbollah's hit list. So I don't go to Lebanon. I'm staying here.
Smart move.
Yes.
Well, since then, you've done a lot of work on Hezbollah and its operations in Lebanon, and
yes,
you wrote a monograph called Bala Land. Tell us about that research.
Yes, thank you for mentioning my book. I spent many years researching it, actually, although it is a small, not a very long book, and really has a lot of visuals in it. But it took a long time to get information, which most of it really is not in the open source. Like it required a lot of interviews and staying in certain areas in Lebanon. I went to Dahi. I am from the south, so I went to the south. I went to Baalbek. I had to go to Shia strongholds. Dahi was the most interesting. That's why I focused on it, because it is a microcosm of all the Shia community in Lebanon. You have everyone from the Shia community in Dahi, because it is really like the Beirut hub of the Shia community. And I realized at one point that, which I really wanted to do this, because there's a lot of stereotyping of the Shia community. And this is something that Hezbollah loves, that we stereotype the Shia community in the sense that they are all Hezbollah, and this benefits Hezbollah because this is exactly what Hezbollah wants. But on the contrary, the Shia community is much more complicated and diverse than that. At one point, yes, the majority of the Shia were pro-Hezbollah, and Hezbollah told them that they liberated the land in 2000. Like this was the peak of Hezbollah, and the majority of the Shia were pro-Hezbollah. But things changed drastically since then. So, I go into the layers of the Shia community, the levels of fluctuating support and opposition within the Shia community, depending on all the layers between religious and the left, the tribes versus the families, Amal versus Hezbollah, the upper class, lower class, and how Hezbollah also shifted its approach towards the Shia community depending on the era, depending on the time, on the conflict, Syria versus Israel, etc. So this is the Hezbollah shifts itself, like transforms itself to get to the Shia community until recently, with the 2019 protests and afterwards the port of explosion. And my book stops there because I had to publish it at one point. But it really, I wanted to show that there are a lot of gaps and layers within the Shia community that constitute great opportunities for policy, that there are gaps that someone else needs to fill before Hezbollah comes back and fills them. And this is what they do. And now they have challenges that we need to take opportunity of. And this is where I explore in my books the gaps and the opportunities and Hezbollah challenges that are also opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I understand where you see the gaps. I am obviously concerned that we don't see any other Shia faction sort of filling those gaps. And that, I think, has always been the concern, right? That you just don't have anybody stepping up and challenging Hezbollah, because it's, of course, the strongest faction, not just within the Shia community, but within all of Lebanon. I mean, there's no actor that can challenge it legitimately. So that's
they kill you. No, they've killed everyone who challenged them. It's like there were people who challenged them, but they killed them.
Yeah.
Or they threatened them, or they exiled them. So the people who can do this are no longer a challenge because they got rid of them, and the people who are not exiled or killed, they're too afraid and they're powerless because no one supports them. They have nothing. Nothing, no resources, no protection, nothing. Yeah. So how do you do that?
Speaking of no one challenging, I mean, there's only one actor right now that is willing to challenge Hezbollah, and that's, of course, Israel. And right now, war looks like it's looming. So my question to you is how you would expect a war like this to unfold. Do you think that Hezbollah will bring out of those underground bunkers the precision-guided munitions and some of the other dangerous and perhaps new weapons that have not yet been introduced into the Middle East? And then once that happens, what do you think unfolds from there?
Yes, that's the question of this week and the coming weeks, I guess. Let me start by saying that Hezbollah doesn't want to do that. They will do that when they are forced to do it, when they feel Hezbollah's job today has transformed from 2006. And I think the way we're going to see that kind of escalation, it's not going to be a 2006 operation. There are so many layers and so many ways of waging this war between what we have today and 2006, right? That many things can happen in between. And I think we're looking at something in the middle, which is a limited operation, something that is more of an escalation than now, but without risking Hezbollah's thousands of missiles on Israel every day. Using Hezbollah's precision missiles actually is a big deal because Hezbollah has a couple of hundred, if not more, precision-guided missiles that they can use to hit serious Israeli infrastructure, livelihood infrastructure. We're talking about internet, water, electricity, serious economic and livelihood infrastructure. And this is something that Hezbollah has been threatening with since the beginning of the war, or since 2006, actually. However, they haven't used them yet because they don't want this war. Hezbollah's mission shifted since 2006 from one that is focused on Israel and the resistance and Lebanon. They were like more Lebanon focused. And then with Syria, everything changed. Hezbollah with Qasem Soleimani shifted. Qasem Soleimani made Hezbollah the core of the Quds force. the IRGC Quds Force. They became really the dynamo of the Quds Force. They went to Syria, to the region, and today they are Iran's main element in the region. Their role today, their mission, is to be Iran's insurance policy. That is, if Iran feels that the regime is directly threatened, if Iran feels that their nuclear program is directly threatened, their main interests are directly threatened, then they will unleash Hezbollah. But they will not.
Let me interject for a second, because I mean, I think I understand the argument, and I've heard this from other Lebanese friends as well, that a limited operation is really the only thing that Hezbollah wants. But you know, when we look back at 2006 and the decision that Hezbollah undertook to provoke Israel and then to engage in a war, that escalated quickly. And whatever they thought they were going to do back then, it obviously changed. It became something that was much more devastating for the country. And so I guess my question right now is, can we rely on this notion that Hezbollah wants only a limited operation and then that's what's only going to happen? I mean, isn't there a serious risk? They are gambling with the lives of 5 million Lebanese, are they not?
Yeah, this is not their concern. Their concern is what Israel is going to do. So Hezbollah doesn't, I still believe that Hezbollah is trying, there's a huge difference between really trying to avoid a big war and wanting it. Anything can happen that would start a war. Mistakes, a wrong target, this is always a possibility, but there's a difference between trying to avoid it and trying to go for it. Hezbollah is still trying to avoid it. But of course, you know, this might happen any minute because it's not what Israel wants. Israel wants to go after Hezbollah. Israel prefers actually at this point to, you know, all the statements that are coming from Israel, the meetings, the decisions, the U.S. collision. It shows that Israel is more willing to do this war, but because it's about Israel's security, it's not about another country's security. But the problem with Israel that is still involved in Gaza, they are going to need some time to breathe a little bit, to restock, to prepare for the big Lebanon war, and they need the U.S. support, political support, military support, all kinds of support, because Lebanon war could be a very long and messy war, and we're talking about serious damage to Israel, not just to Lebanon. That being said, the something that I'm looking at in between, something more than this, something that would allow Israel to regain the upper hand in this conflict, something of a limited escalation, not a huge war like 2006, where they, you know, like bomb the airport and bomb, you know, Lebanon's infrastructure and bridges, but an escalation that would go more into Hezbollah's assets. So far, Israel has been assassinating high-rank commanders, 20 high-rank commanders in addition to hundreds of soldiers, but 20 high-rank commanders is a serious number for them. But there were certain red lines that Israel hasn't really touched, probably the precision missiles facilities, the precision missiles depot, certain areas that they were going to be targeted during the war. So we can see this. We can see a limited ground incursion into south of Lithuania. So this is something that could be under, you know, like the title of limited escalation. But I don't think it's going to be like an incursion, ground incursion that would go invasion all the way to Beirut, or like bombing everything in Lebanon like 2006, because this is going to take not only months, probably years, to actually solve Hezbollah's problem and resolve the displacement in Israel.
Well, it's quite a gamble. I will say that, you know, trying to game this out, I mean, I think certainly the Israelis didn't want this war, that it began on October 8th for them when they started getting hit by Hezbollah. And we've seen the steady escalation. They feel like they've got very little choice but to respond. And of course, when they respond, you never know how you're going to game this thing out. It's obviously a challenge. We're going to need to leave it there. Hanin Ghaddar, thank you so much for joining the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to keep engaging with Authentic Lebanese voices. We want to hear what people have to say as we watch that tension. In the meantime, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Ben Cohen has a jarring piece in JNS News on the rape of a 12-year-old Jewish girl in France. He notes violence against Jews is not an uncommon thing in France. He also knows that the rape comes on the heels of Hamas's sexual violence on October 7th, something that anti-Semites continue to deny. Ben calls on world leaders and lawmakers to intensify their efforts to combat anti-Semitism. My colleague Cleo Pascal has a piece in the Military Times commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands. Fought just 9 days after D-Day, the battle is considered as pivotal for the Pacific as D-Day was for the war in Europe. Cleo's piece is well worth the read. And finally, Max Maislish from FDD Center on Economic and Financial Power has a policy brief on the new sanctions from the state and treasury departments targeting over 300 individuals and entities supporting Russia's ongoing offensive in Ukraine. Max warns that without effective oversight and broad international cooperation, not to mention more funding for Treasury's financial warriors, these sanctions could have a limited impact. That's one we'll continue to watch. Well, it's been a pleasure, folks. That's it for today. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD and support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer signing off for FDD.